All right. Making his return to the Staff and Graph podcast is Jesse Marshall, my absolute dude. How are you doing?
Seat still warm, still feels the same, It's like riding a bike. Right back on it. Right back on it. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, I'm super excited to have you on. The Pittsburgh Penguins just made the first selection of the Kyle Dubas era, and they selected center Brayden Yager. So let's talk about that, and then we're going to get into all of the other things the Pittsburgh Penguins did because they're doing a lot of things. What
Right.
are your thoughts on this pick?
So I Yeager probably the third best shooter in this draft class, I think. I put him behind Colby Barlow and obviously like Connor Bedard's a given. We got to just probably skip past that one. But he's really deliberate in how he does it. I think he's one of these shooters, Rachel, in this class specifically that does a really good job of tucking the puck. So he likes to pull it, drag it back, and then kind of get that extra launch forward. That does, I think, two things. It adds to his velocity, and it also hides what he's doing from the goalie, right? It adds to a little bit of the deception that he brings. But I mean, the deception's one thing, but I mean, sometimes it's just like he lets them rip. That's it. Like he sets them on the end of the blade. He bears down, gets a lot of ice surface, and trebuchets the puck into the net. And you can't teach people how to do that. I also think that coming into the zone, Rachel, like it doesn't really matter what the situation is that where the puck is on his stick, what foot is he on forward. With he can get rid of the puck really fast in really unconventional fashions. So I think most of my analysis, frankly, when I get into like the good stuff with him, is going to be about his shot. I mean, I think that's at the end of the day, probably the thing that the legs that feed the wolf here, I think, as far as this whole game goes. And I know, like, scoring down for him a little bit this year, but, in the games that I watched anyway, preparing for this, it wasn't just the shot. I mean, I thought that he was really effective in transition coming into the zone. Vision, he was setting up teammates, made a lot of slot-based entry plays. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to like. I think the Penguins and Kyle Dubas here kind of swung for the fences on offensive skill. And maybe there are some other warts in some other places, but I think they definitely ignored them.
They're like, "Hey, warts? No. Potential? Yes." And
Yeah,
and on our podcast, we stand the potential
we sure
because
do.
what we don't do is take the safe pick at fifth overall and at like
Yeah,
sixth overall. Like, well, okay, sure. So the Penguins, they obviously right now they have Crosby and Malkin. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're pretty good.
yeah,
So you look at that, Braden Yager is going to get an opportunity to learn from them.
yeah.
So if you look at it, maybe he comes in and because he's got such a great shot, is he a fit on one of their wings in a year or two from now? Because, I mean, they can both pass the puck pretty well, no?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind him there, at all. I think like from a size perspective, I think analytics back this up too, Rachel. So I don't think it's just my sense. I think this is actually like something we can quantify and look at is that what he does off puck maybe sometimes isn't enough, right? And I think if you're a center, like that's a huge responsibility, a huge part of the reads you have to make in the offensive and defensive zone, the role that you play in the breakout, all of it's connected. That's all interconnected. And I think if in some situations, Rachel, putting a guy that has a really talented shot and likes to use it and is very direct in his attack on the wing releases them from a burden potentially and allows them to like maybe be a little bit more simpler in their approach and have a little bit less of a burden defensively. So I wouldn't rule it out. Corey Pronman at the Athletics, another person who's pointed that out and said that he wouldn't be shocked if that took place either, and it's a potential route that this thing could take.
Yeah, so then maybe he sort of becomes a younger version of Jake Guentzel, which is somebody who's just ripping pucks from the wing and scoring all manner of goals.
Yeah.
Speaking of Jake Guentzel, that is a current Pittsburgh Penguins player. Another current Pittsburgh Penguins player as of 5 hours ago is Reilly Smith. Kyle Dubas giving up a pick, mid-round pick next year to nab 2 more years of Reilly Smith. What are your thoughts on that? I know we've talked about the Misfits a ton and how Reilly Smith doesn't get enough love. You were the first person I thought of. So the floor is yours.
Well, you got to look at this in the lens of like what we're coming out of in the Ron Hextall era. So I think everybody in Pittsburgh today was just like, oh my God, like what a refreshing drink of water this is, like, Mike Sullivan's lip service today was that this move doesn't impact the ability to re-sign Jason Zucker. I don't buy that. Evolving Hockey's contract projection for Jason Zucker is 5 years, $5 million, and I don't think the Penguins are in a position to give him that. So I do think that this is now. What I do think is interesting is that Smith played his best hockey, agree or disagree, on the left side.
I agree.
Right side. So that means that I think one of Rickard Rakell or Brian Rust, and I don't think it's going to be Rickard Rakell, is going to have to move. You could put him on the left side. His best hockey on the top, when he played on the top line with Vegas and was really eating, was on the right. So I don't, what does that mean for Brian Rust? Is that a movable contract? Is he on the way out?
That misfit,
something we've talked about, right? So
that misfit line where he was on the right and it was William Karlsson and Jonathan Marchessault, and then obviously he got moved down and Vegas won the cup, and Barbashev was on the right, but Reilly Smith was fantastic in the playoffs on the right side. And when he got to play further down the lineup, and with like no disrespect to Chandler Stevenson, if Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin is your center, that is a significant upgrade over anybody on Vegas, frankly. I mean, what are you expecting out of Reilly Smith? Is it 30 goals next year?
You know why I'm thinking about that answer, Rachel, is because he scored 26 this year and finished under expectation, really. If you look at the data around it, he could have had more goals. He should have probably had more goals. I think he finished in like the 56th percentile of forwards, which is not great, right?
No,
all those other metrics, the supporting metrics behind that, though, were like the repeatable metrics were really strong. So you like to think that, despite all of the Penguins' problems, and we could spend a whole 9-hour show going over them from the Hextall era, the one thing they didn't have a problem with, Rachel, was the top six. And it worked. It carried them almost into the playoffs. It barely failed. So they know they have the goods there. They know that top six is really rich. This adds to that in a really, I think, dynamic way that significantly improves the Penguins off the rush, which was an area where they were not good enough last year. This really bolsters that. He's going to make the penalty kill better. It was just a really good. You basically got Reilly Smith for Teddy Bluger is basically what this trade is, because this is the Bluger pick. So it's just a fantastic piece of business when you think of it that way.
Yeah, if you could turn Teddy Bluger into Reilly Smith, I don't think there's a general manager that wouldn't do that.
Right.
And if they wouldn't, they probably shouldn't be a general manager anymore. Right. So what are your last one for you before I let you go? And if you want to hear Jesse and I talk about how me and Jesse's daughter like Elmo and the Grinch, we're definitely going to have Jesse on over the summer, so you can look forward to that. And maybe we'll get an appearance of the Elmo, the mini Elmo.
Yeah.
What are your first impressions of Kyle Dubas as president of hockey operations and expectations into free agency?
So I think everyone's impressed so far, Rachel. He's super well-spoken. He articulates himself very well. He's already made some savvy hires. I think he's made a good draft pick here. I think the Penguins get a good player out of this. We already talked about the Smith deal. It's just a different aura, man. It's at the end of the day, the vibe is really tangibly, I think, different. And you get the sense that, there's competent people at the wheel. So it stinks to, I think, have burned a year of this window that you get with Crosby and Malkin. But you get the sense that, the Penguins were close. This is a roster that's right there. It needs a little tinkering. You've heard rumors about Jeff Petrie being on the way out to San Jose potentially. All this other stuff, sensical moves that you would say, yeah, this is great. This is heading them in the right direction. So overall, I think first impressions are all A+ top notch.
Yeah, I think if Jeff Petrie was to go to San Jose, maybe one of the players I would covet in that deal would be a Thomas Bordelot or maybe an Ozzie Wiesblatt, a younger player, but that is capable and very close to playing in the NHL. I think that would suit what Pittsburgh needs. And of course, I would trust Kyle Dubas to identify that. And I think
you call it the Michael Bunting formula, Rachel, is what that's called, I think, right?
I believe we have discussed this. Yes.
Yeah.
The finding underappreciated players and paying them almost no money, but then they score at a $5 million clip. We love those players.
Yeah, phenomenal.
All right. Jesse, thank you so much for joining me. I can't wait to have you on the big show this summer, and we're going to have a ton of fun. Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Look forward to it. Thanks.